From 1974 to 1986, the Golden State Killer terrorized California with a relentless campaign of burglaries, brutal rapes, and at least 13 murders that left communities living in constant fear. It began with the Visalia Ransacker burglaries in Tulare County in 1974 and 1975, then evolved into the East Area rapist attacks around Sacramento from 1976 to 1979, and later merged with the original Night Stalker homicides across Southern California from 1979 to 1986. Victims described a stalking predator who broke into homes at night, tied people up, raped women in their own beds, and in many cases executed couples with cold-blooded brutality. Across Contra Costa, Sacramento, Ventura, Orange, and other counties, families faced nights of terror. Neighborhood watch groups patrolled nervously, and local papers ran fear-filled accounts. Investigations were fragmented. City and county agencies kept separate files. Evidence sharing was inconsistent, and forensic tools were primitive. No national DNA database, no forensic genetic genealogy, and limited computerized records. So leads too often went cold. Multiple nicknames reflected siloed probes that only later proved to be the same predator, a chilling realization that reshaped the hunt. Years later, investigators turned to genetic genealogy to make a breakthrough. The pattern hardened quickly and brutally. What began as the Visalia Ransackers' frustrated rummaging across Tulare County in 1974 to 1975 evolved into methodical, violent home invasions by 1976, and then into the original Night Stalkers' cold-blooded killings across Southern California from 1979 onward. In Sacramento County between 1976 and 1979, women described a stalking predator who tested doors and windows, cut telephone lines, slipped in through unlocked back doors and dimly lit hallways, bound victims' wrists with ligatures torn from sheets or clothing, blindfolded and gagged them, and raped them at knife point. Terrified husbands were often bound and watched while a savage sexual assault occurred. Neighbors in Contra Costa County and Rancho Cordova reported late-night prowlers. Families added extra locks, and local newspapers ran stark accounts that left neighborhoods feeling besieged. Subscribe. Maybe someone would have noticed sooner. Investigators in Sacramento, Contra Costa, Tulare, Ventura, and Orange counties operated largely in isolation. Evidence files were fragmented. Sketches and shoe print comparisons were circulated on paper, and amateur composite drawings often stood in for forensic certainty. Police chased false leads. Suspects were arrested on shaky eyewitness identification, misattributed burglaries, and handwriting analysis that offered only circumstantial links and no convictions. Routine tasks like logging break-ins, preserving bedding and other evidence, and cataloging fibers were inconsistent from agency to agency, so cords, ligatures, and biological samples sat in disparate evidence rooms for years. The attackers' evolving methodology, surveillance of houses during daylight, a return at night, the steady escalation from theft to sexual violence to homicide, kept him 2 steps ahead of investigators who lacked a centralized deoxyribonucleic acid database and the later tool of genetic genealogy. Each bungled lead and missed forensic connections stoked public terror and built momentum toward a more desperate, coordinated hunt that would define Act 2. Detectives who inherited paper files and brittle plastic evidence boxes refused to abandon the hunt. Their persistence turned decades of neglect into a forensic advantage. By 2001, investigators in Sacramento, Contra Costa, and Los Angeles counties had compared biological samples and confirmed that semen and blood tied the Visalia Ransacker, the East Area rapist, and the original Night Stalker, the same predator haunting Northern and Southern California. Agencies began re-examining preserved bedding, ligatures, and discarded clothing with modern methods. Mitochondrial and nuclear DNA testing, PCR amplification of degraded samples, and entry into the FBI database CODIS. Those hits were partial, frustrating, and inconclusive against living suspects. But the linked DNA transformed the case from a patchwork of attacks into a single, methodical crime spree, stretching from Visalia to Orange County. The real revolution arrived decades later with forensic genetic genealogy. In early 2018, Sacramento investigators, working with amateur and professional genealogists, uploaded a crime scene SNP profile, single nucleotide polymorphism, to public genealogy databases such as GEDmatch and began building expansive family trees from distant matches. Genetic genealogists, notably Barbara Ray Venter, together with collaborative volunteers and crime lab staff, triangulated relationships, narrowed hundreds of names to a single line of descent, and produced a candidate profile that demanded confrontation. That approach was decisive but incendiary. Civil libertarians, privacy advocates, and legal scholars immediately raised questions about consent, the use of consumer DNA for criminal probes, and Fourth Amendment implications. GEDmatch changed its policies, and courts and legislatures began to reckon with new boundaries. Still, for detectives who had chased a remorseless, blood-stained predator for decades, genetic genealogy provided the tangible lead that pushed the investigation into its final, unavoidable phase. Family trees collapsed into a single, chilling line until all the leads converged on one name: Joseph James DeAngelo. Investigators in Sacramento and Contra Costa used GEDmatch and public records to trace distant DNA matches, then mapped addresses, jobs, and movements until DeAngelo's pattern of residence and timing fit the monstrous timeline of attacks from 1974 to 1986. The discovery that the prime suspect was a former police officer, a man who once wore a badge in Exeter, sent a cold jolt through departments and communities. The betrayal cut sharper than any blade, turning the case from a grim hunt into a scandalous moral outrage. In April 2018, detectives put DeAngelo under covert surveillance, documenting his routines, vehicle access, and refuse routes so they would not contaminate evidence. On April 21st, plainclothes officers followed him to a grocery stop, watched him discard a tissue, and, under court authorization, recovered it. Forensic scientists extracted a full nuclear DNA profile from the tissue and compared it to the decades-old crime scene profile that linked the Visalia Ransacker, the East Area rapist, and the original Night Stalker. The match was unequivocal. Laboratory confirmation turned genealogical theory into forensic fact and gave prosecutors the probable cause they needed. Sacramento County investigators presented the DNA match, surveillance logs, and genealogical mapping to a judge, who signed arrest and search warrants. By April 24, 2018, the net closed. Officers moved in on DeAngelo in Citrus Heights, executing the warrants that culminated years of dogged, grim work and pushed the case toward its inevitable, brutal reckoning. After years of genealogical triangulation and the decisive DNA match described in Act 3, officers moved without drama on April 24, 2018, executing arrest and search warrants at Joseph James DeAngelo's home in Citrus Heights, Sacramento County, bringing a monstrous, decades-long hunt to an end. Plainclothes detectives handcuffed the former Exeter police officer, cataloged seized items, and filed a stack of criminal charges in Sacramento County, linking him to a gruesome spree of burglaries, savage rapes, and cold-blooded murders from 1974 to 1986. News helicopters and reporters swarmed as prosecutors and investigators presented forensic exhibits and genealogical timelines to a stunned public. Survivors and family members watched and listened with a mixture of brittle relief and renewed, raw grief as names and dates resurfaced in open court. The dread that had hung over neighborhoods finally had a tangible face in custody, but the wounds reopened with every courtroom detail. On June 29, 2020, DeAngelo pleaded guilty in Sacramento to the decades-old crimes, a move that avoided a death penalty trial. On August 21, 2020, a judge sentenced him to life without parole, ensuring permanent confinement. The guilty pleas and life sentence offered legal closure while survivors measured relief against the long shadow of horror he left behind. When DeAngelo was arrested and later pleaded guilty, many survivors experienced measurable closure. even as the raw trauma of sexual violence and murder persisted. The Golden State Killer case forced a major shift in investigative technique. Police turned to genetic genealogy, which led agencies to reopen cold cases, re-examine decades-old evidence, and create dedicated cold case units. It also sparked wide policy and privacy debates. GED match tightened its rules, courts wrestled with Fourth Amendment issues, and legislatures considered new limits on consumer DNA use. Victim advocacy groups pushed for better counseling, clearer victim notification, and long-term support as communities continued to process the psychological fallout of stalking, home invasion, and brutal killings. Culturally, the saga changed expectations about the power of technology, police accountability, and the limits of anonymity, leaving a chilling reminder. Advances in forensics can both solve horrific crimes and unsettle civil liberties.